Unfortunately, I run a very dictatorial kind of set when it comes to the performances. I don't feel like a director most days. I feel like a writer who happens to direct his own script. So I'm very anal retentive about the script, and people like Affleck find that very frustrating. So I'm telling you, why don't you take your stupid dialogue, put it in your own flick? And he did, and he won an Oscar. So
share 30 minutes with the most independent voices in cinema today. Their purpose, their process, their passion. Conversations in World Cinema.
Next on Sundance Channel.
Hi, I'm Richard Pena, Program Director of the Film Society of Lincoln Center, and welcome to Conversations in World Cinema. What do a convenience store, a comic book convention, and the threshold of the apocalypse have in common? Filmmaker Kevin Smith.
I'd never been one of these people like Spielberg that kind of sits around and makes the Super 8 epics in the backyard, and I want to be a filmmaker one day. I had no idea what I wanted to be.
Join me and an audience of film students and fans for a conversation with filmmaker Kevin Smith. Highlands, New Jersey, a small middle-class town surrounded by a suburban sprawl of all-night diners, strip malls, and convenience stores, and the childhood home of filmmaker Kevin Smith. Smith's formative years were spent consuming as much as 6 hours of television a day, watching action movies at the multiplex with his father, and attending Catholic Mass every Sunday. After a brief stint studying creative writing at the New School in New York City, Smith later took some classes at the Vancouver Film School, but left after deciding that his tuition might be better spent making a movie. Back in New Jersey, he snagged a $5 an hour job at a convenience store and waited for inspiration to strike. They say, write what you know, and eventually Smith did. He wrote a story set in a convenience store, and with his former film school classmate Scott Mosier as producer, shot the film after hours in the very store where he was working during the day. The result was Clerks, made for the now legendary sum of about $27,000. Clerks went from the independent feature film market in New York to the 1994 Sundance Film Festival. Miramax head Harvey Weinstein was wowed by the film and struck a deal then and there. Clerks was a resounding success with audiences and became the prime example of credit card independent filmmaking, a legend qualified somewhat by the fact that Smith also had to sell his comic book collection to finance the production. On the heels of this scrappy, spirited debut, Smith made the much larger budgeted Mallrats. Much like Clerks, the film spans one day in the life of two do-nothing 20-somethings bumming around a mall, concocting schemes to win back their girlfriends. Coolly received by just about everyone, Mallrats would nevertheless introduce Smith to actors Ben Affleck, Jason Lee, and Joey Lauren Adams, serving as a kind of casting call for his next film. Made for just $250,000, 1997's Chasing Amy is the story of a comic book artist who falls in love with a lesbian, and was a comeback of sorts for a director many critics had dismissed as a one-hit wonder. With Chasing Amy, the look and feel of a Kevin Smith film had become clearly established. A simple visual style punctuated by sharp one-liners and featuring a collection of recurring characters. What's more, Chasing Amy was noted for an emotional depth, something his other films, for all their many charms, had lacked.
Wings, now. I'm feeling a little exposed here. Do it!
In Dogma, Smith's latest project, two renegade angels played by Matt Damon and Ben Affleck discover what they think is a loophole in church dogma that will allow them back into paradise, an event which, were it to take place, would destroy humankind. Described as a combination of poop and prophecy, the film was targeted for protest by several religious groups, leading Disney, parent company of Miramax, the film's producer, to eventually drop it. Lionsgate Films ended up distributing the controversial film, which has proved to be Smith's greatest commercial success to date. More than many filmmakers, Kevin Smith has a devoted, almost cult-like following of fans who follow his career through Smith's elaborate website, View Askew. True to his inspiration, he also owns a comic book store and has offices in Red Bank, New Jersey, the town that has served as a backdrop for many of his films. From Leonardo's Quick Stop, Smith looked at life from behind the counter and thought he wasn't going anywhere. 8 years later, and just 14 miles away, Smith's distinctly American voice is heard and appreciated all over the world.
When I was growing up, I was just a movie buff, like most kids, I think, are movie buffs. It was all about TV and movies for me. My father would come and pick me up from school on Wednesdays and take me to the movies all the time, never fail, week after week. And that's something that I think definitely had a lot to do with my interest in flicks, because there was just something really warm and wonderful about sitting there in the dark week after week with my father watching someone else's art. You know, of course, when I was young, it wasn't art, it was just movies. We saw Time Bandits, we saw Raiders of the Lost Ark. I remember I saw Raiders of the Lost Ark before anyone else in my class had seen it. And I remember going into school the next day and trying to impart to everybody that Indiana Jones was just way cooler than James Bond. Stuff like that, to like The World According to Garp, really sticks out in my mind, because it's not really a movie that like a kid would necessarily enjoy. But my father wanted to see it, and I guess you know, I was the only person that would go with him. And it was a movie that had a great impact on me. I'm a big fan of that film. So it was a wide array of flicks that we saw. It wasn't just action thrillers, which are kind of my father's cup of tea, but it was pretty much anything and everything that came out. I grew up in Jersey, and I grew up in this area called Monmouth County, and so I try to reflect a lot of what I saw growing up. So you see things in the flicks all the time that are kind of little pieces or little snapshots of the home. The convenience store culture, of course, in Clerks is a big part of that.
Yo, Flo, tell Mel to whip me up a toasted bagel with cream cheese.
The diner in Chasing Amy, it was very important for me to get a diner into the movie because we're lousy with them in the state. They're everywhere. That's where people go at 2, 3 in the morning. Skee-ball was another big thing that you also see in Chasing Amy and in DOGMA, and that's something that I really identify with New Jersey. You know, I just really think of home when I think of skee-ball, and that was kind of neat to get up there on flick. Hockey, street hockey, and hockey in any form. I mean, you see street hockey in Clerks, where they play hockey on the roof. It's more roof hockey. But there's always the element of hockey in the flicks we've done, and that's something that came from growing up there. Being a filmmaker in New Jersey and chronicling stories that happen or occur in New Jersey isn't so much a state pride thing as it is, this is my home, this is where I grew up, and these are the kind of stories I like to tell. I'm not necessarily the biggest fan New Jersey's ever had, it's just where I grew up.
Please welcome Kevin Smith.
Nice, very civil. I haven't heard a reaction like that since we announced we would not be making a Mallrats sequel. It's pretty,
So Kevin, start off telling us a little bit about Kevin Smith before Clerks. What brought you into cinema, and how did the idea to make a film like Clerks first come about?
Prior to cinema, there was just a lot of job after job type situations. I was a busboy for a while. And then I was a convenience store guy for a long time, because that was way easier than busing. I don't know if you've ever worked. The register, it's genius, and it's great. And
bartending's the key, though.
Yeah, but bartending, you actually have to work. You know, you're expected to give people things. In the convenience store, you just kind of collect their money, and you know, and that's, you don't even really have to ring things up. They have the exact change. You're watching TV, and that's great. So I did that for quite some time. And on my 21st birthday, I remember we went up to the Angelica, a friend of mine and myself, to see Slacker. We'd read a review about it in the Village Voice. And we weren't really big city goers. You know, we pretty much stayed in the suburbs and went to multiplex flicks. But we went up to the Angelica and saw Slacker, and boy, it was just a real eye-opening experience, you know, because it's a wonderful movie. But it's also not like any movies I'd seen prior to that. You know, I wasn't raised on, like, you know, Eric Rohmer and Godard films. I was raised on John Hughes and John Landis type movies and big bombastic action thrillers. And this was a movie about some rednecks, you know, walking around Austin, Texas, just jawing, you know, talking about inane topics, and there was no through line and no villain. And I was really mystified. But loved it. I thought it was, wow, this is great, you know. And the weird thing was the reaction to it was a lot. It was based a lot on what how the audience was reacting. Like, I thought it was very funny, but people were just, you know, busting a gut, slapping their knees over how hysterical they thought it was. And I was just like, wow, I mean, it's funny, but if they think this is funny, like, God, I think I can make something funny too, you know. I mean, no disrespect to Richard at all, but it was kind of I've always thought of it as viewing the movie with a mixture of awe and arrogance, just like, wow, I've never seen anything like it, but if this is a movie, I think I can make a movie.
I think for me, the best independent films do that.
Yeah, they kind of empower you. I mean, and years later, I would hear that from people about Clerks, the flick we did, and they're like, I saw your movie and I wanted to become a filmmaker. And at first, you know, you're kind of flattered by it, but then they're like, because it just looks so bad, you know? It's just like, if that counts as movies, I can make a movie. And so you're like, well, thanks, I think. But
had you fooled around before with short films or anything like that?
No, before that, never really. I mean, I've never been one of these people like Spielberg that kind of sits around and makes the Super 8 epics in the backyard, and I want to be a filmmaker one day. I had no idea what I wanted to be. But I'd always been an avid writer. I liked writing quite a bit, and I'd written, like, I think my first story when I was maybe 11, 12, or 13 in that period, and we'd had a typewriter in the house, and one day I started playing around with it, and showed it to my brother, and it was about going to a family outing or a shindig or something like that, or being dragged to a family party. And he thought it was really funny, like, you know, he was really, really laughing, and that was encouraging. You know, suddenly I was like, oh, I get it. You write, and people like it, and then you want to write more. And when I saw Slacker, I at that point I was thinking about writing as a career, but I didn't know what. Like, how does a writer get paid to write? And the only thing I thought that was fairly accessible was, like, working at the newspaper. Like, I figured I could write obituaries and maybe work my way up to being a columnist in the local paper. And then when I saw Slacker, suddenly it was just like, no, I could write films. And I'm not a visual person. If you've seen the flicks I've done, you've programmed some of the flicks I've done, and you know, thank you, but Lord knows I'm a terrible visual stylist. You know, I'm probably the least crafty director working, probably the most inept director working in my field, and I line up 3 people against a flat wall and shoot it and call it cinema, and
but it
it's
works.
just not really. It does work,
right.
I guess, but you know, the critics don't think it worked. You read some reviews, they're like, you know, the first time we'll forgive him, it looked like crap, but good Lord, grow up, you know. He just keeps making the same visual movie. But for me, it's not really. I know it's a visual medium, but I'm more interested in the storytelling and the characters and the writing. And Slacker was the movie that I looked at and was kind of like, well, there's a movie that doesn't look wonderful, and I could kind of do that. And so I started looking at other people's flicks too, like Jarmusch's early stuff, which was very also just, you know, one camera, and sometimes it would dolly along, but most times things happened in front of it, and that's what I really liked. And the early Hartley films for their dialogue banter back and forth, and how surrealistic it was, and very theatrical, and not very naturalistic or hyper-naturalistic.
One thing, when you talk about people like Jarmusch and Hal Hartley and whatever, in a way, I mean, I don't know everyone's exact ages, but I think of them as a generation before you, and they were sort of the last movie brats, the people who really went to the Cinematheques and Museum of Modern Arts and places like that to see movies and then try to do whatever they could in their work. Whereas I guess you come from a next generation, and I find a lot of the people in that generation more formed by TV.
Sure.
Do you think that's important for you as an influence?
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, there's no culture, you know, in that in TV. But yeah, we're definitely the people that grew up watching TV and also watching video. You know, the advent of video was around our time. And you'll find a lot of us worked in video stores, did time in video stores and whatnot. But I always like to think of us as a kind of lazy generation of filmmakers. Like, we wanted to be in film because we weren't much good at anything else. And some people have the true calling, and you know, really have a message to impart, and really have stunning visuals and style to get across. And some of us don't. We're just like, well, I mean, you know, beats laying brick for a living. I guess this will be okay. and have a few funny jokes to tell or a few interesting stories to tell.
So you got out there on the set the first day of Clerks, and what did you do?
Did what I did on every movie since then, just put the camera in place and just let things happen in front of it. And the DP was like, what are we going to do first? You know, I've got an idea for a tracking shot that comes around here. I'm like, what are you, high? Put it on sticks and let's let it happen. Unfortunately, I do have one of the most frustrated DPs in the business, because I try to give him leeway, but I just fall into the same patterns all the time. And I'm like, all right, Dave, because we worked with Dave on Clerks, Mallrats, and Chasing Amy, and we used Bob Yeoman on DOGMA, but DOGMA we actually tried to do something a little more cinematic. But Dave, on the other three flicks, at the beginning of every shot, I would say, okay, we're going to go for it. He's like, I know, a two-shot this. I'm like, how do you know? He's like, we do it every time. So when I first got out there, it was kind of like that, and you know, we didn't get to watch our dailies right away. We had more monthlies than dailies, and we watched all the footage after the movie was shot, and you know, thankfully it just kind of came together like it did. And I think by virtue of the fact that it was kind of, it worked the first time. I just didn't feel the need, if it's not broke, don't fix it. And like, if it worked that time, I can keep doing it. And I remember reading something in the Village Voice. Amy Talbot was the first person to write about anything we'd ever done, which was Clerks. And she said, his style is that he has no style. And I was just like, all right, so I have a style.
May I be blunt with you?
If you must.
We are employees of the Quick Stop Convenience and RST Video, respectively. As such, we have certain obligations, though they may seem cruel and unusual, does mean manning the store until closing.
I see, so playing hockey and attending wakes, these practices are standard operating procedure.
There's a difference. Those are obligations. Obligations that couldn't have been met at any other date. Now, renting videos, that's just gratuitous, not to mention illogical, being that you work at a video store.
Are you open?
Yes.
For me, your films are so quintessentially New Jersey. I mean, they're very much tri-state area, the rhythms, the characters, the locations. What's it like showing your films abroad? I know the distributor, the Italian distributor of Clerks, and he had a great success with it.
Yeah.
He was very happy with it.
That was shocking. I mean, when we made the flick, I really thought that this is a movie that's never going to play outside of our home county, Monmouth County. I was like, you know, only people from around here will get it. And when we submitted to Sundance and brought it to Sundance, it you know, it was clearly bigger than Monmouth County, and people were kind of digging on the movie. I was like, all right, so maybe it's not so regional, but it's clearly an American film. There's no way this movie translates overseas. And then we went to Cannes with Clerks, and it played really well there, and everybody that picked it up, like the French distributor, Back Films, the Italian distributor, Italy, it charted. It was in the top 10 when it first came out opening week, our weird little movie. And it seemed to have translated, and I guess it speaks more to the kind of universality of just comedy or day in the life type stuff. The movies have very much been up till this point just kind of day in the life portrait, and I guess whether you're in Italy or France or America, people have shitty jobs all over. So I think the movie just played by virtue of that.
With Clerks, you sort of entered into a long-term relationship now with Miramax. How has that been, working with Miramax? In a way, you're very much an independent, but been part of, I guess, the biggest of all independents.
Yeah, and it's tough to. I mean, they've got this weird, crafty thing going on where everyone thinks they're independent, but let's face it, it's a studio, you know, and they make movies now. They make movies more than they actually acquire movies. We've had a really good relationship with them. You know, everyone talks about Harvey being, you know, this weird, mad fascist who's always cutting movies and stuff, and he's always let us alone. On Clerks, I remember he. After he bought the movie, he said, I'm an old man, this is a young man's movie, I don't know anything about it. If you can find 10 minutes, cut it. I have no suggestions. And so Scott and I had watched the movie, Scott, my producer, Mosier. We knew going in that there was some stuff we can cut. But between that and Chasing Amy, which he really, really loved, and he had no notes on whatsoever in terms of cuts or anything like that. And DOGMA, we've had a very strong relationship with him. DOGMA, of course, he was way more about the cuts on. It was the first time we'd ever kind of faced that version of Harvey. And he never tried to take the movie away and whatnot, but he did whittle us away. Like, the first cut of the movie was, I'm just so embarrassed, 3 hours and 15 minutes. And at that point, we're like, this is the movie. You know, it's going out like this. It's bigger and better than Dances with Wolves, right? And he was just like, okay, I can see that. He took a very cool approach to it. He was like, all right, yeah, good, it's good. He's like, but there are some trim, you will admit there's some trims in there. We could probably take it down a few minutes. I was like, all right, we'll take a look. And week after week, month after month, he took that approach. It was never like, Kevin, get that time out or I'm going to shit can your movie. It was always just like, I'm sure we can find the time. We'll look for it in here and look for it in here. And he got us down to like 2 hours. You know, before we knew it, it was just like, what happened to that whole hour and 15-minute part of the movie? It was just gone. And he was kind of crafty about it, and never threatening, but just played on the vanity. I guess to some degree I'm a very vain person, and if you say nice things about me, I'll do whatever you want, right? So if you say, Kevin's a great movie, and I was like, thanks. He's like, could we cut a few minutes? I'm like, yeah, sure. I mean,
what do you want with me?
I'm to charge you with a holy crusade.
For the record, I work in an abortion clinic.
Noah was a drunk, look what he accomplished. And no one's asking you to build an ark. All you got to do is go to New Jersey.
One of the things that I really love about your films are really the characters. I think of all the many qualities, you create not only interesting characters, but really unpredictable. And it's so refreshing, I think, in today's cinema to see characters where you don't know what they're going to say next, which is, to me, one of the great qualities of DOGMA, is like you have an apostle who doesn't really necessarily act like how we might think an apostle does, or, you know, an angel that doesn't necessarily act like an angel does. How do you work? I mean, is that something you feel is really script-bound, or is this something that comes out in a work with the actors?
No, unfortunately, I run a very dictatorial kind of set when it comes to the performances. I hate ad-libbing, you know, and I hate people that make up stuff on the spot. And that's because I don't feel like a director most days. I feel like a writer who's happens to direct his own scripts. So I'm very anal retentive about the script, you know. It's just like the dialogue's there. And sometimes, I mean, I don't want to sound highfalutin, but sometimes it does. It's intricately crafted, right? The conversations are leading somewhere. So most of the conversations are very long setups to a punchline. So if you start letting people throw stuff in, it starts weakening the structure and whatnot. And people like Affleck find that very frustrating, because Ben Affleck is a big mad libber. Like, he just gets on the set and wants to throw in all jokes and dialogue and everything that has nothing to do with what you've written. And I you know, I've worked with the dude 3 times, and each time I was always like, why don't you stop it? Because I'm not going to use any of this. And he's like, this is gold, this is genius. The audience will love this kind of thing. I said, I'm telling you, it's going to hit the cutting room floor. Why don't you take your stupid dialogue, put it in your own flick? And he did, and he won an Oscar. So, I guess
should have listened.
I know, I should have lent him a little more credence. But I'm very anal retentive about the dialogue. I always like to kind of, we rehearse for usually a month in advance, sometimes a month and a half, maybe 2, just to try to get the patter down, just to try to get all that dialogue and that text memorized. And then we go forward from there. The only exception...
Is it hard to control Chris Rock? I mean, I've talked about
yeah, I was just going to say, Rock, like, I remember when I sat down with Rock to meet him and talk about the flick, here was a guy whose work I really dig. Like, I love what Chris Rock does. I think he's brilliant, and I love his comedy. And it's weird when you're casting a comedian, who's someone you think of as a comedian first, because he is an actor, but chiefly as a comedian. And you're asking them, you know, I like what you do, but what you do for a living, you can't do it here. You know, like, chiefly, I'm hiring you because of how much I admire what you do for a living, but unfortunately, it's not going to be welcome here. So I was going back and forth, vacillating on whether or not to bring it up in the interview process, and I was just like, I just got to be honest. Like, when we shoot, I'm really dictatorial about the script. It's all script. I don't like ad-libbing. He said, not even rehearsal? I said, I know, not even then. I said, I'm really not about it. And he said, all right, well, and he was just kind of blanched on the topic. And then he went and saw Chasing Amy. He hadn't seen it yet, and he called me up and he said, I saw that movie you did, and he said, you could put anything you want in my mouth within reason. And so he was really good about it on the set. But I did one day ask him to throw something in, which is the first time I've ever done it with an actor. There was a line in the script where Rufus falls for the first time, and Bethany meets him, and you know, he says something about Christ, and she goes, wait, Christ, you knew Christ. And in the script, he said, knew him, I saw him naked, which was always kind of a weak sauce line to me. And it was Chris's last day and his last take, and I was just like, Rock, you can do whatever you want with this take. Oh, can I finally? I said, yeah, go nuts, man, go have a good time. I'm not real wild about the line. If you can come up with something better, throw it in.
You know, death is a worry of the living. The dead, like myself, only worry about decay and necrophiliacs.
Told you he was the undead.
Not the undead, the dead. I died. You know, Christ told me the secret to the resurrection once. We were at this wedding in Cana, right? And I got drunk and forgot it.
Wait. Christ? You knew Christ?
No, shit, nigga owes me $12.
So talk about Mallrats. Come on, don't hold back.
I like Mallrats a lot. Mallrats is kind of like the redheaded stepchild of the bunch, right? because you could
How'd
just
you get
slap
into-
the
how'd you get
shit out
into
of it, beat it around, and people are with you. They're like, yeah, beat that film, because it was no damn good. I'm like, I know, right? But it's actually the one movie that out of all the flicks we've done so far that I can watch repeatedly. I can put in the VCR and go about doing whatever I do, work in the office or being at home or whatever, and not like really lose it. You can walk out of the room, I'm all right, for 20 minutes, come back, and you miss nothing. And the movie's still going on. The movie was done in a weekend, you know, and by the second weekend it was out of theaters. So it was a crushing experience. And it wasn't until much later that we were able to step back and go like, oh, it's pretty cool. The idea of like, we made a movie that flopped. You know, it was not everyone can say that, you know?
We got some questions from our audience here today. Let's take a few questions. Yes.
Hi, my name is Chioke Hargrove, and I was wondering how you worked with cinematographer Bob Yeoman for the cinematography on Dogma.
Bob Yeoman was a gentleman who shot Drugstore Cowboy, and he shot Rushmore last year. He was a really great guy, and I sat down with Bob after he had watched our first 3 flicks and said, what did I do wrong, Bob, and what do we want to do that's right this time around? Because we were very conscious of trying to make it look so much better than the other flicks. And he said, it's not like you really did that much wrong. He said, but you do kind of have 2 guys against a wall and you're shooting flat, dead on, and there's no depth whatsoever. He says, if you just come over here and kind of shoot this way, suddenly you're opening up the frame and it's a little more interesting. And he said, you might want to get into coverage more. You know, it's nice to do something mise-en-scene, let some stuff happen in front of the camera, but so much of your stuff is dialogue. You know, in Clerks, you had a 7-minute scene between 2 people with the backdrop of a bunch of videotapes. It would have been nice to get some coverage and some cutaways and whatnot. So we had a pretty good relationship. He really got along quite well with Scott Mosier, my producer. They had a very similar sense of humor and sensibility. And there were times that I was just like, God, one of these 2 are going to get fucking married. They just love each other so much. I was just jealous, right? But we had a very good working relationship, and he was just a really kind, sweet guy, and never lost patience, you know. And sometimes you're working on a very hectic schedule, and just always very meticulous, and kind of did the job, did it real justice. And I thought the film looked phenomenal, you know, for what it was. I thought it looked really, really great.
Yes.
Hi, Kevin. I was wondering how your directorial technique has changed between Clerks and Dogma, and what was it like working with more established actors and actresses?
The big change I noticed on this movie was on Clerks that there were a lot of line readings. Like I would sit there and tell actors how to say things. You know, because the understanding for me was, why bother sit there and try and play that game where, can you try it more like something else, or try more and try to give them emotions to work with? You know, I say lead the horse right to water, and so I would just say it like this, and I would repeat the line to them, and then hopefully they would just parrot or mimic it back. And that worked really well in the first flick, and even the second flick. Second flick, I came up against Shannon Doherty one day, and I was telling her how to say the line, and I had no idea there was a name for this procedure, and she looked at me shocked, like she got hit in the face with a shovel, and she was just like, did you just give me a line reading? And I was like, is that what it's called? Yeah, I gave you a line reading. And some actors don't really take kindly to that. Some actors want to kind of, you know, emote and find the character themselves, and I was never really comfortable with that, and it seemed like a lot of artsy-fartsy nonsense. On this picture, though, on Dogma, I didn't have to do many line readings at all, by virtue of the fact that the actors said the lines the way I heard them in my head when I wrote them, or better most times. So I wasn't like, no, try it like this. They heard it. You know, you got someone like Alan Rickman, you don't really have to explain to him how to deliver a particular line. And Ben, I'd worked with him so damn much. He's used to it. He knows the drill, and he's gotten way better. And Maddie is just such a wonderful actor and did great things with a character that wasn't primarily written for him. It had been written for Jason Lee. And then kind of took it in a different direction in terms of delivery, and just made it a very unique character. And so there wasn't a lot of line reading going on that picture, and that's where I kind of changed the most, I think. Visually as well, if you look at Dogma and you look at Clerks, hopefully there's noticeable growth there between the 2. But those are the 2 big areas, I think.
Well, Kevin, we look forward to the new films and the new directions you're going in. Thanks a lot for coming today. Thank you all for coming.